Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana, and we're here today with special guest, Dr. Danielle Armour, who's here to share with us secrets to reclaiming your lost sense of self. Have you ever felt like pieces of yourself have just slipped away, and the numbness or heaviness you feel is actually your body asking you to come home to yourself? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. Dr. Danielle Armour is a psychotherapist, clinical sexologist, and nervous system specialist with over 15 years of experience helping women and couples restore balance, resilience, and connection. Drawing on neuroscience, somatic healing, and cognitive restructuring, she offers a compassionate, science-based approach that reframes stress and disconnection as a body's natural way of seeking safety. Through practical tools like breathwork, yoga, mindfulness, and nervous system regulation, Dr. Armour guides people in cultivating self-awareness, confidence, and a renewed sense of vitality. So welcome to the show, Dr. Danielle Armour.
Thank you, Marianne. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Oh my goodness, what a great honor it is to have you here again and to really dive into not just your book, but the work that you do. So, what inspired you to explore this connection between the emotional well being and the physical body in such a profound way?
Well, Marianne, I could spend our whole time together on this question alone. This work was really born out of both my love for science and lived experience. When I was going through my own major life transition, which was a divorce with very small children, I felt emotionally prepared. I'm a clinician, right? I knew the steps. I understood grief. I understood anticipatory anxiety. I understood the strain that comes from dismantling a life and rebuilding it. And mentally, I moved through all of that. I did the work. I really did. But my body, my body was holding on to what my mind thought it already processed. And so things started to click for me in a much deeper way when I started to really focus on the body. And then I started to notice these same patterns with my clients, right? These emotions that we thought we would release, that would just pass through us, they didn't. They lived in the physical body. Stress, grief, disconnection, they were showing up as tightness, fatigue, numbness, this sense of being off even when you think you're doing everything right. So, my curiosity became, how can we listen more deeply to what our bodies are trying to tell us, especially when our minds believe they've already figured it out, right? How do we integrate a mind body approach that's grounded in real neuroscience, not just theory? And that's really what Awaken Your Body, Awaken Your Desire is about. It's restoring the dialogue between emotion and physiology so healing becomes whole, more integration. And for women, especially who have been conditioned to prioritize everyone and everything else before themselves, this reconnection allows us to tap back into our desire, our vitality, our lust for life in a way that centers our own experience, not our performance.
What a profound journey you've been on. And I really appreciate you sharing this with us because how many of us have done the workshops, done the integrations, done the meditations, but then still find out that, whatever name that these events or what have you've been to, there's still that major disconnection
Hmm.
between the body and how we're feeling. A lot of people are just walking out around like super stressed and not really knowing how to work through that, integrate it, and release it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We think we know, right? We did the work. We showed up, right? We really tried, but yet things just don't feel the way we're assuming they should feel.
Oh, I think I have more workshops under my belt than I should have with that, which is why I'm so grateful for you because I mean, your work really does make such a profound difference. So, when we talk about awaken your desire from within, what does that really truly mean for someone who feels so emotionally and physically depleted?
Mm, yeah. When you're exhausted, desire, I think, can feel like something that belongs to another version of you, right? Like this ideal version of you. And I think that awakening desire from within isn't about forcing yourself to feel anything. It's about rebuilding the internal conditions where desire could return someday, right? For someone depleted, it starts with tiny moments of reconnection, right? So that might be feeling your breath, noticing the temperature of your hands, right? Taking a mindful pause during the day. Those micro moments tell your nervous system that you're listening, right? That you're safe, that you're really tuning in. And so desire grows in that spaciousness, not under pressure, right? When we're depleted, there's just this constant pressure on us the majority of the time. And so it's less about the idea of lighting a spark, right? And more about clearing away what's been smothering that spark.
That's such a big piece. And is
Mm.
that what a lot of people are kind of missing? Is that science piece that's telling us that we need to really take those moments?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately we're moving through the world at this, sprint pace, right? This we're just going and we're going and we're going and we're not giving ourselves the time to really slow down and listen to what we're needing, right? So when we're depleted, we're often thinking like, okay, well, what should I do different versus what should I stop doing maybe, right? Where can I give some space here?
We look at that because we are going, I mean, I could just think of my day to day running through everything, going a
Yeah.
million miles an hour
Yeah.
and still feeling like, oh my gosh, I still have so much more to do. So, for people who are so just busy, how do they find time to come into alignment?
Mm, yeah. I think that if we can listen to our bodies, we would notice that they're surprisingly honest, right? So mine gets loud when I ignore myself, right? I get a tight chest, I have shallow breath, everything feels harder than it should, right? And for many people, being out of alignment, right? The body starts speaking through things like lingering fatigue, um, tension in the hips, chest, or the belly, headaches, digestive issues, numbness, right? Feeling emotionally flat. These aren't random symptoms, they're messages. And when something is off emotionally or the body just feels out of whack, right, we can get the clues by tuning in to the physical body long before our mind might send us the signal.
So I know you've mentioned quite a bit here. So when our body is they're trying my body's trying to communicate with me, like maybe I've had too much caffeine, I'm not taking a break and
Mm,
things are really out of alignment. Is it through these emotional or energetic cues?
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, so here's the thing, right? The mind and the body is interconnected even when we're not paying attention to that connection, right? So I personally believe that most of the time our body will send us these signals, right? Feeling like you're sleeping plenty but you're waking up exhausted, right? Feeling like you are really allowing yourself to eat well, move well, connect with the loved ones around you, but everything still feels muted, right? So sometimes it's those bodily cues that are telling us, wait, check in with the mind. And sometimes it's the other way around, right? We're talking a lot about, the cues from the body, but sometimes the mind feels this like sense of dread, right? Like you're doing the same thing and you know what you're doing, but yet you're dreading doing what you're doing. So I think it's a really important interplay, and we have to be mindful of both.
Well, I love that you bring this up because a lot of times when we're feeling flat or emotionally drained, or just like things aren't lining up and we're just not feeling what we call like quote ourselves,
Hmm.
a lot of times we get advice to go exercise, suck it up, go and just I mean, we get all this kind of advice on how to keep marching forward. So, what are some ways that we can really start connecting with our body then?
Yeah. I think honestly, mindfulness, right? Mindfulness brings us back to ourselves, right? And I don't mean that polished, productive version that we show the world, right? The person who's doing all of the things, but rather that living, breathing human that's underneath it all, right? So mindfulness, even something as simple as noticing the sensation of your feet on the floor, can shift your nervous system out of that vigilance and into presence. And really, that's what mindfulness is all about, right? Being present. And so, again, that mindfulness opens a doorway back into the body. And the moment you return to the body, you return to balance in a more organic way, right? A more attuned way. And it's usually pretty subtle and quiet, but it can change everything if we can catch that awareness, right? If we can catch that state of presence through mindfulness.
I know you've covered so much already, but what are some of maybe the early signs that someone has really lost their connection with their vitality?
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Some of what I just mentioned, right? That idea that joy is almost work, right? Where you're doing all of the right things. You're eating well, you're moving your body, you're connecting with the folks around you, but it just feels like too much work. It feels heavy. A big one I see is what I like to call practical autopilot, right? You're functioning, but you're not feeling. You're productive, but you're not present. You're living, but you don't really feel alive. And I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true, right? We're just doing the things. We're just living rather than really embracing life. And, I think that those are the subtle cues that our body is whispering to us, hey, are you listening? Because I miss you.
What an important piece that is. And you touched on mindfulness, and I'd like to dive deeper into that. So, how can mindfulness practices help us restore balance and just our overall feeling like alive?
Mm, yeah. Mindfulness really does bring us back to ourselves, right? I know that I mentioned that, but I think that the simple concept of being alive is to breathe, right? To pay attention to your breath, to be allowing that air to flow in and out in a way that you simply can only do when you're alive. And I think that the way that we can most, let's say, the easiest accessible way to feel that grounded sense of aliveness is through our breath.
So, do you have a simple practice that we can either do right now or walk through that will help us bring us back to our breath?
Yeah. Yes. So I would say I have many favorites, but a current favorite, which is an evidence based breathwork practice, which really helps the nervous system to downshift, is a simple inhale through your nose to the count of four and an exhale through your mouth for the count of six. And the reason why we exhale longer than we inhale is because we want to activate that vagus nerve. We want to send that signal to the brain that the body is safe by reducing that sympathetic arousal, right? That sympathetic state of stress. That's our stress response. And so inhaling to the count of four and exhaling to the count of six, repeated for just 3 cycles, is enough to shift the system out of that stress state and into a more regulated state.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's such an important piece. And you talked about how this regulates our sympathetic nervous system. So,
Mhm.
can you share what that is and how that works with the body? And because I think a lot of times we hear about this, but we're not sure how this, if we get this out of whack, what it is, what it does, and why it's so important to bring it back.
Yeah, absolutely. So, our sympathetic is that stress response. Our parasympathetic is that rest and digest response, right? The ability to pause and be mindful, right? And when we're in a sympathetic state of arousal, we're drawing upon all of those stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and we are getting ourselves caught in this cycle of feeling tense, of feeling braced, of feeling constricted. So when I encourage the idea of exhaling longer than an inhale, right, to reduce that sympathetic arousal, it's essentially for the purpose of telling your body, okay, I can rest. I can activate that parasympathetic, that rest and digest state.
Thank you for going through that. I
Yeah.
learn something new every day. So,
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, in your work, you really emphasize the importance of slowing down. And we've talked about this a little bit before. So, why is stillness so essential in a world that rewards constant productivity?
Mm. Because the body doesn't heal in a hurry. And it never will. And I don't like to talk in absolutes, Marianne, but the body doesn't heal when it feels like it's in a hurry. Stillness is really essential because it creates, the internal quiet where truth can rise to the surface, where we notice, maybe the tension we've been carrying or the longing we've been overriding. I would say, during my own difficult times, I find that the loudest truths, the ones that I try to outrun, they only surface when I finally stop moving, when I slow myself down. And I think for many of us, it's because we use that busy mask as a protective mechanism, right? Don't slow down. What will happen if you slow down? Right? But when you finally stop moving, at least when I do, when I give myself permission to feel, I can really tune in. We live in a culture that glorifies busy, right? But like I said earlier, the nervous system can't heal in a sprint. Stillness, in my opinion, gives the body permission to downshift, to soften, to recalibrate. And, I think people often equate stillness with being lazy for some reason, right? And it's not laziness. It's this opportunity to reclaim our space, ourselves.
You're so right. Because when you do hear people just like, I'm sitting and being quiet, it's like, oh, they're not doing anything. When
Mhm.
that's probably their most important section of the day.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you how often I hear like, "Oh no, I can't rest. I have too much to do." Right? That would just be lazy, you know. If I take a few hours on a Saturday to give myself some rest, then I won't get everything done. Right? It's almost like this panic of don't slow down, don't be still.
So, are there some lifestyle changes that people should make in an effort to really be quiet and to slow down, to still? I mean, from what they eat to how they spend their day?
You know, honestly, I think that we are all so different, Marianne, right? We all have such different needs. And you, just simply thinking about how we've all been conditioned to feel, the guilt around, I need to do this, I need to go here, I need to eat really well, I need to move my body in this way, right? There's like so many rules around how to do things. So it's hard to answer what are the lifestyle things that we can do, because I would need people to be honest with themselves, right? Are you running from thing to thing to thing, and what you actually need to do is take some of the stressors off of your plate, or to delegate, or to ask for help, which is so hard, right? I think, you know so many of us are constantly looking for the next thing that will heal us quickly, that it's actually slowing down and tuning in and being consistent that will tell us what in our lifestyle needs to change.
We're so used to that instant gratification when it comes to having things that we think that we get that also when it comes to personal development.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Those things can be such big, huge shifts. And I know that we've talked about this and we've touched in on how rest is so important. So, for those that are looking to self nourish and really putting this as a priority, like this is a necessity, not an indulgence,
Mhm.
how can they start cultivating that time in their day and get to a place where they are not feeling like, ooh, I am being lazy or guilty about it?
Yeah. Yeah, I love telling people that even 3 to 5 minutes a day of picking a mindfulness practice, picking a somatic movement, can completely transform their day to day lives. 3 to 5 minutes, right? And that might be a breathwork practice, that might be a mantra based meditation, that might be a lazy, and I'm using the word lazy on purpose, because a lazy micro movement that you do consistently, repetitively, right? I call them somatic expressive movements, right? As simple as laying in a bed and moving your feet back and forth, left to right, listening to a playlist and giving your body a chance to regulate, right? 3 to 5 minutes, a song can totally change the way that we move through life for the rest of the day. Just simply giving yourself that space, that tiny amount of time, right? We think it's these big efforts, right? I have to go to that 90-minute yoga class, right? I have to do, all of my food prep. And that's ultimately how I'm going to feel better, right? But really, it's just that slowing down and settling into whatever can help us be more mindful.
You know, when you said lazy, I kinda cringed a little bit. I had time
Yeah,
with that. I was like, "Oh, I don't know
right.
if I can really, like, embody that," because we've been so ingrained to think that taking time to ourselves and being quiet is, like, a bad thing.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But 3 to 5 minutes a day, if we could start building that pathway, right? Creating that pattern in our brain, right? And everything that we do is a pattern. Every behavioral interaction, everything is a pattern, and ultimately a neural pathway that we're creating by repetition. So 3 to 5 minutes can start that process.
I so love how you bring in science. This is all science-backed practices. This isn't wishful thinking or I think I'm going to do this today. There's science behind this saying, do this, and these are the results you're going to get.
Yeah, exactly. Because ultimately, first and foremost, I am a scientist. I'm a behaviorist, right? I want to be able to test these theories. I want to draw upon evidence. I want to know that what I'm recommending to my folks is effective, right? I'm not about the quick fix, like I said before, right? I'm about sustainability, and we need to have solid information to be able to say, yes, this is sustainable, right? This will really, really move that needle for you.
So when we start off with 3 to 5 minutes a day, do we work that up to a larger number, or is that all that's really needed?
I would say that, in an ideal world, I would love for everyone to be able to take at least 30 minutes a day. But I think that for a lot of people is actually a big ask. And so 3 to 5 minutes is effective. 15 minutes would be my, if I can't go anymore, let's do that. Right. But really the biggest part of it all is consistent effort, right? If you can just show up every day, and some days it's 3 minutes and some days it's 30 minutes, right? If you can allow yourself to be flexible in the process, but you still show up, that's what matters.
So I want to dive into a topic that you have in your book and I found was so profound, and it's about forgiveness.
Mhm.
So, what role does forgiveness, not just of other people, and one of the big ones I think is ourselves, play in personal healing?
Yeah. Forgiveness is probably one of the most profound forms of nervous system release, in my opinion, especially self forgiveness. But self forgiveness is often the hardest as well. Many of us carry years of guilt for leaving, for staying, for saying too much, for not saying enough. And our bodies hold on to every ounce of that tension, right? The guilt for things we did to survive. And so, I want the idea of forgiveness to not be about excusing anything, right? We're not making an excuse, but I want forgiveness to be about unclenching the heart, right? When we hold on to resentment, again, especially toward ourselves, our bodies stay in a braced state, right? Which means tension. We carry tension, caught in a cycle of frustration. So I think personally, when we forgive, we give the body a chance to exhale, right? We give the body a chance to let go, but we have to give it permission to do so. And that's an active process.
Is it more difficult in your experience for us to forgive others than it is for ourselves?
I think that we're actually more able to forgive other people, um, because I think that we tend to take the, let's call it self blame, right? And so we can make a lot of excuses, for the lack of a better way to say it, right? We can justify other people's behavior. But when it comes to ourselves, we tend to tell ourselves, I should have known better, right? I should have done more. I should have seen this coming. I should have, right? It's almost easier, I think, for a lot of people, and this is anecdotally, right? To say, okay, well, you had a lot going on, right? You were going through it. This happened in your life. That happened in your life. But I think it's much harder to turn that on ourselves, right? To be more compassionate to ourselves.
Is it that people tend to forget that while we are forgiving everybody else, forgiving ourselves is a part of that equation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's more likely that we're trying to be perfect when that's just not achievable. There's no such thing.
Oh my gosh, I think I gave that up a long time ago.
Me too.
Oh my goodness. Well, and I want to touch on emotional awareness. And
Mm,
can you share an example of how emotional awareness can shift someone's entire sense of connection and purpose?
yes, yeah. I worked with a woman recently who had described feeling numb for so long, Marianne. She didn't understand it. She said she felt empty, right? And as a clinician, it essentially sounded like apathy, right? She forgot how to feel connected to something bigger than her day to day life. She was going through the motions, checking off her to do lists, right? The one thing she did for herself with any regularity was exercise. But even her exercise was vigorous because that's what she was conditioned to believe was healthy, right? She raced through her workouts and checked the box. And, as she began practicing somatic awareness with me through slowing down, tuning into her bodily cues, using meditation, using breath work, using more gentle movement, journaling with prompts so she didn't have to create them herself, right? She started to notice something that was, I would say, so subtle that she could have missed it. The numbness wasn't emptiness. It was her body's way of saying, I've been overwhelmed for too long, right? That realization, that her body wasn't betraying her, but it was protecting her, changed everything. She was overstimulated all the time, being pulled in different directions and never giving herself a chance to recalibrate. Her numbness was essentially protection. And so, with this new awareness, she was able to start having compassion for herself. She couldn't connect to herself before our work because she was performing all the time. She couldn't connect to other people because she felt like she wasn't being seen, right? Like she was serving a purpose for everyone else, but wasn't getting anything in return. And so, I think that her own purpose didn't come from pushing herself more like she had been doing for years and years and years. It came from finally meeting herself where she actually was, right? Letting life feel messy instead of perfect, letting herself rest, letting herself come first, which is totally foreign to most of us. But I would say that, helping her shift into holding herself in a higher regard helped her to feel more in touch with her own needs and wants, right? She felt creative again. She felt inspired, all because of the awareness that she was feeling numb because she was overwhelmed, right? She was then able to course correct.
Oh my goodness. How amazing is that? Is that like one of the number one things that people come to you for? Because I know you have a waiting list. You see, you definitely see, clients about this. Is it
Mhm.
because of feeling numb? Is that like one of the number one things you hear?
That is definitely high up on the list. I have a lot of people that come to me when they just don't feel connected to anything. And I know I've used the word connected a lot, right? But numbness is that disconnection from something greater than the day-to-day functioning, right? It's like, people are coming to me like, wait a second, I thought that, when I hit a certain marker in my life, right? When I did all of the things that I was told that I was supposed to do, I climbed the ladder, I'm successful, I have a great this and a great that, right? That I should somehow feel this like sense of enlightenment, right? I'm joyous. But it's that day to day that all of those pressures, all of that life that happens, if we don't take accountability for being mindful and present and in touch with what we need to feel good and feel connected so that we don't numb out, so that we don't lose our connection to the emotions that we want to have, right? We tend to get crowded by the emotions we don't want to have.
That's such a huge piece, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share that. I think it's just so interesting. A lot of people, I mean, I was the same way. You go through life, you reach certain achievements, you think,
Hmm.
oh, life is going to be amazing. And then you get to the other side of that, and it's like, whoa, this is
Yeah.
not what I was expecting.
Yeah. Right. Right. I think that I wish someone at some point, when you're in your like early to mid 20s, maybe even late 20s, I wish someone was like, hey, just so you know, adulthood is a lot of just managing stress, right? From every angle, all the time, you're managing stress. So when you do have something joyous happen, you really have to lean into it so it's not clouded by all of that stress.
For sure. And just the expectation that just because you hit certain milestones, it isn't like you've arrived.
Right.
There's still, there's a lot still to work either. I don't know if I work through is the right word, but to deal with.
Yeah. Right. It's an ever evolving process.
So I'd like to touch in on trauma because we
Mm.
kind of touched on that a little bit earlier. And so how does unresolved trauma manifest in the body? And what are some really gentle ways we can begin to release that?
Mm. Trauma. Um, Unresolved trauma that is stored in the body often looks like tension you can't stretch away, seemingly chronic tightness, exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, like I mentioned earlier, right? That, we were just talking about that emotional numbness or that feeling flat. But then also conversely, a hypervigilance, right? Where everything feels like it's bringing up a lot of emotion, a lot of deep emotion. Um, and I think especially difficulty relaxing during all forms of intimacy. And so, gentle release starts with exactly what we've been talking about all along, Marianne, grounding breath, really paying attention to your breath patterns. I want you to remember that your breath is the remote control for your nervous system, and we need to be holding the remote. Take it back from whoever you gave it to, right? That's your remote. You get to control that breathing pattern that affects the way your nervous system responds. And also, slow intentional movements using techniques that I talk extensively about in the book to get into the places in the body that we store stress and tension. The hips, for example, right? And it can be either long held stretches or, like I was saying earlier, those repetitive tiny movements, right? They're both ways to help the body regulate, and regulation leads to release. And so, I want to add here that if you've done the emotional processing with a qualified professional, because I do think that's important, that's a part of the process, right? You can do this work in parallel, but if you've done the emotional work with a professional and you're not feeling relief, it's really time to get the body involved, right? Using gentle releases. Trauma unwinds when the body itself feels supported.
Okay, so on the flip side of that, what happens when someone really learns to truly listen to the messages of their own body?
Mm, yeah. They develop an inner trust that becomes just unshakable, right? Decisions get clearer, boundaries become more intuitive, I would say. Life feels less like a performance and more like a relationship with yourself. And when that internal relationship strengthens, your desire for life grows naturally because you're no longer overriding your body, you're partnering with it.
Well, I like this being in partnership with our body. I mean, what an important piece that is.
Mhm.
How would you define wholeness? And what does that look like in like everyday life?
Mm, yeah. Well, I can tell you that wholeness isn't about having everything figured out, right? Even though we definitely believe that to be the case. And it's also not about being healed, right? I think that wholeness is about allowing all the parts of you, the joyful, the grieving, the tired, the hopeful, to belong. They all have a place at the table. In practical terms, wholeness looks like noticing your needs and actually responding to them, right? It's integration, not perfection. I think to be whole is to radically accept your humanness.
That can be a tough one for some people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, right. We all want to be a superhero, right? We want to be able to do everything.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, we're also being told you need to be everything.
Yeah.
You have to show up, even when you're exhausted and tired and really have no more left to give.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, I agree.
What are some of the myths that you'd like to dispel about desire and fulfillment and self discovery?
Mm. You know, I think the first is that the idea that desire is something you get back, right? Like it's a misplaced item. You should be able to find it if you just search hard enough. And it simply just doesn't work like that. Desire is something you tend to, like a garden. You water it, you create the internal conditions where it feels safe to grow, right? Desire emerges when we give it room to breathe, when we give ourselves permission to want, right? To want without shame, to want without comparison, and without apologizing for what we want. Um, which leads me to, a myth about fulfillment. Fulfillment doesn't come from doing more, even though that's what we tend to believe, right? Most of the women I work with are already doing everything. What they're missing isn't effort, it's connection to their bodies, to their intuition, to, their inner truth, not what has been told should be their inner truth, right? Fulfillment isn't an achievement, right? I'd say it's more of an alignment with the way we want to move through the world. Again, not how we should. So many things are coming up for me, but the last one I'll say is, I think that there's this myth out there that desire disappears with age. It doesn't, right? Desire evolves, desire deepens, it becomes wiser and more intentional if we let it, right? Our capacity for desire, for real desire, is incredibly, incredibly resilient. And often it becomes more authentic as we grow into our authentic selves. And I think, it's important to say here that desire is really a reflection of our inner world, right? It shows us where we're connected and where we're depleted, as we were talking about earlier. And in that way, I think that desire is actually one of the most powerful tools for self discovery.
I think for a lot of people who are feeling just shut down and numb and just disconnected, this provides a lot of hope for them that
Mm,
life doesn't have to be like that way. I mean,
yeah,
we can make shifts to make things better.
yes, absolutely.
So, how do we dive into rebuilding trust in ourselves after long periods of being shut down or
Mm,
emotionally disconnected?
mm. You know, I think I hinted at this earlier, but that trust is able to be rebuilt, is able to grow through consistent effort, right? Through consistency, not these grand gestures. Starting with tiny promises you can keep, right? Something as simple as I'll take, one slow, deliberate breath before I check my phone, right? Or I'll notice how my body feels once today and really give it my attention, right? Every one of these kept promises is this reminder to your body, but more importantly to your nervous system, right? That you're here and you're not going to abandon yourself, right? That's how self trust returns after emotional shutdown, is that consistent showing up for yourself.
I love that. There's really a light at the end of the tunnel for people who are just feeling, in other words, kind of like blah. I'm not even sure
Hmm.
if there's a better word for that.
Right. No, I think that's the perfect word.
In your book, you write about courage and what it takes to be present in our own skin, and that's such a big piece.
Mm,
So, how can people start to develop little areas of courage within their life?
mm, yeah. Yeah. Presence is built through tolerable doses of feeling, right? It's not diving into the deep end, it's simply maybe dipping in a toe, right? It can be cultivated with something as simple as noticing the warmth of your hands or the cold of your hands, or placing a palm on your heart for a moment. Using these tiny points of contact to help the body learn that sensation is safe. It really can be that simple: presence, stillness, connection, and a pause, right? But the key, once again, is consistency, right? It's checking in consistently. These are the micro moments that build the capacity to stay with yourself. And really, staying with yourself is the foundation of courage, right? To be with yourself when things might feel a little scary.
So then how do you navigate clients through these scary, "Ooh, I don't wanna feel vulnerable to other people," kind of area to a place where they're moving beyond this self-protection that we, like, kind of build up for ourselves?
Mm, yeah. You know, I talk with clients a lot about pacing. Vulnerability without boundaries feels unsafe, but boundaries without vulnerability feels isolating, right? So the goal has to be integration, safety first, then a gentle opening. And safety comes from self regulation, right? Regulating the nervous system through all of the tools that we're talking about today so that you're able to move into a vulnerable space intentionally. And also know that when you start to feel like you're becoming dysregulated again, it's time to get back into the body, right? That ability to move between vulnerability and self protection is the ability to stay connected to yourself through regulation.
Okay. So, how let's just put it this way. So, what changes have you seen in your clients once they begin embracing this work of inner alignment and body awareness?
Mm, yeah. I think that the first thing I want to say is getting the awareness is so important because the first changes are often really subtle. A deeper breath because they're finally holding that remote control with more confidence, right? Knowing how powerful their breath is. Fewer headaches because there's less tension in the physical body, a little more laughter. Um, then comes, that sense of emotional spaciousness, a softening, I would say, And eventually, intimacy shifts too, because, they didn't need to try harder. They really needed the mind and body to finally feel safe enough to connect again to themselves and to others. But, I would say that the most profound change is that return of the self-trust of believing that they can listen to themselves, right? That they can really trust in what their mind and body is telling them.
I think that's such a big piece for people to get to this place where they can really rely on the cues that they're getting from their body. Because, I mean, how
Mm,
often do we ignore that?
yeah, so often.
I know I have.
Mhm.
So, and until I started working with you and doing the work that you have outlined in your book, I mean, things were in a very interesting spot, but just being able to make these connections has been a real game changer.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad to hear that, Marianne. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Of course, of course. And for the folks out there that are feeling disconnected and numb, and I know I've kind of hit those points a few times just because, I mean, I felt that way. I'm sure a lot of people listening either are feeling that way or are just kind of getting to the point where they're just like, what am I doing? I feel like I'm waking up every day doing the same thing. What is like one step they can take today to begin to reconnect with themselves?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say to place one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly and take a slow inhale and an even slower exhale. And ask yourself, what do I need at this moment? And let whatever arises be okay, right? Let yourself feel silly if you've never done this before, if you've never allowed yourself this connection point, right? Let it feel awkward. If you feel disconnected or numb, you need to let yourself find a connection point to you. Talk to yourself, right? The most important relationship you have is the one with yourself, and you have to nurture it. And that connection begins with honesty, not pressure, right? And if your body tells you you need another cup of coffee so you can get more done, kindly ask it again and listen, truly listen to yourself this time.
It's interesting when I just did that, I heard calm, and
Mm.
I have a cup of coffee right next to me that I'm gonna dump out right now. So,
Yes, replace it with some water.
a little water, just kind of make some shifts in what it is that I'm doing because, I mean, all these things impact how our body feels, at least the stuff I'm learning from you, like how our body feels and how we show up in the world.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Oh my goodness, Danielle. I mean, you're such an inspiration. Where can our listeners go to connect with you and learn more, not just about your work? And I'm sure everyone wants to make an appointment so they can feel alive again, but your work and also your book, Awaken Your Body, Awaken Your Desire.
Yeah, so the first place I would tell folks to go is my website, which is www.daniellearmour.com. The other place I would say to go to is perhaps Instagram. I don't, I try to really be mindful about my social media consumption, but it's such an easy way to connect to folks, to put information out there in bite sized pieces, right? Sometimes it is intimidating to pick up a whole book and try to navigate through it, but I like to put a lot of the information that's in my book on Instagram or Facebook. So you can find me at Dr. Danielle Armour on both Instagram and Facebook.
Well, Dr. Armour, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, thank you so much, Marianne, for having me and also for just sharing, what you've learned through getting to know me. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Danielle Armour. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about secrets to reclaiming your lost sense of self. Make sure to visit her website at daniellearmour.com for more information on her work, to schedule an appointment, or to be part of her community. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.